Talkin, TIDF.
Welcome back to episode 2 of Talkin TIDF. This is Cameron.
And this is Stefanie.
And today we are delighted to have our first guest, CHEN Wanling, our programmer for the festival, or one of the programmers. She's also my boss, which is, it's always very fun when you get to interview your boss on air. But also, Stefanie and Wanling are friends as well.
Yeah, it's actually quite an unusual situation to sit in front of you and interview you because, well, we know each other. We've known each other for a long time and we know each other from the dance floor, right?
I think the first time was actually at TIDF when you were volunteering, like when you started. But then I realized that you were part of the tango, like Argentine tango community in Taipei, which is quite surprising because it's a very, very small community. But it's a delight to find out about that.
Yes, that's right. So we share, apart from the TIDF, we also share a passion for tango.
We'll have to come back to that topic of dance a little bit later because that actually comes up in some of the films that were programmed. So I'm curious to hear
there are
that.
dancing films, though.
Yeah, exactly. That's a whole genre of documentary that deserves plenty of attention. So before we get too far into the program, though, we'd love it if you could tell us a little bit more about yourself, Wanling, as well as your background with TIDF.
I joined the TIDF in 2013 in November, but before that I was also working in the industry side of documentary in Taiwan. But since I joined TIDF, I was the program coordinator for competition. But after quite a few editions, I realized I was not so prepared or equipped for this job. So I actually went abroad and studied film studies in the UK and then come back and then resume my job and then becoming the director or the head of the department in 2020. And then my role sort of shift as time goes on. But I think we'll elaborate more on that later.
Building off that, could you also tell us a little bit about when TIDF started? Because I think there's a big transformation that happens just around the time that you joined. And so I'd be curious to hear more, and I know our listeners would be curious to know more about when did it even start and what was it like for, I guess, the first few years of its existence?
TIDF was established in 1998, but I want to first talk about the background of the documentary scene or filmmaking scene in Taiwan back then. And there are many aspects that I want to mention here, but three in major. The first one is the social atmosphere. At that time, it was right before and after the lifting of martial law. At that time, we have a lot of social movements. There were also a lot of reportings on occupational injury and all that. And that led to some of the reporters or journalists documenting ordinary people's lives. And it started with a magazine called 人间 magazine, 人间杂志. And then later on, some of them actually have other equipments to do filmmaking. So they entered the atmosphere of documentary filmmaking. That's one part. The other part is in the 90s or in the late 80s, it was also about the time when the advancing of filmmaking equipment, they become lighter, they're more compact, it's easy to carry around. So it makes it easier for filmmakers or people who want to document things to go around Taiwan documenting the stories that they want. So that's the second thing. The third thing is there are a lot of governmental and non-governmental efforts in organizing workshops or training programs for people to become filmmakers or to tell their own story. So it was all those joint effort in a way that keeps this environment going. And there are a lot of documentaries that was born at that time. And it was also in the 90s, the public television service established. There were also training programs for the journalists to make documentaries within the television setting as well. And the first and only department in the University for Documentary in Tainan, the Tainan University of Arts, was also established then in 1996. So there was all these little efforts here and there that makes this a huge momentum. In Asia, the first documentary festival is in Yamagata, Japan, which is 1989. So in the 90s, it was already more or less 9 or 10 years that YIDFF or the Yamagata existed. So there were all these people already making documentaries and showing documentary work in Asia. And we were thinking maybe we should have something like that. So people in the cultural scene and people in the government organizations, they all come together and they gave birth to TIDF in 1998. Yeah.
Since you mentioned Yamagata, actually that's a film festival. It's the so-called sister festival, maybe, of TIDF, and it's also biannual, so you're alternating. And well, I've been to this festival as well several times, and I liked it a lot. Would you say that you got inspiration from the Yamagata Film Festival, or that you maybe want to make the TIDF somewhat different from Yamagata?
To be honest, I joined TIDF quite late, and I came to know about TIDF quite late as well. So all this history actually traced back when I started working with TIDF. But as far as I know, in the 90s, when they were about to, start this festival, the first and probably the only reference was Yamagata, like how they organize their festival as a biennial, their program structure and everything. So that influenced the establishment of TIDF as well. And since back then, there were a lot of momentums in documentary scene and filmmaking in Taiwan already, but there were still not enough. So having an annual festival didn't really make sense back then because we just didn't have that many films to be shown. And of course, programming works or documentaries from other countries can be a bit difficult at that time too. So they started also as a biennial. Sort of, you can probably say that it's a bit copying Yamagata's reference or their experience, like building a festival for 1 year and then going on a tour program in the next year. It is also a conscious choice that we're alternating with Yamagata, like 1 year Yamagata, 1 year TIDF, so we can also visit each other. Until now, actually, we do visit each other at the festival. Yeah.
Well, and I think it's also important here to point out that Yamagata also has this whole important line, comes partially through the work of the Japanese documentary director Ogawa Shinsuke and his whole documentary collective and the ways in which they organized and used screenings across Japan to fund their filmmaking that then feeds into a film festival that then influences a film festival in Taiwan. But I think there's also ways in which the TIDF here in Taiwan has evolved to really fit both the documentary production space as well as the relationship between society and documentary, especially given the fact that TIDF is housed at this point now at the Taiwan Film and Audiovisual Institute. So I wonder if you could actually touch on that, because as I understand, TIDF previously did not fall under the purview of TFAI. It was separate, but then it came under the purview of TFAI around the time that you joined, right? What was that transformation like? What did that mean?
In the beginning, there wasn't a sort of stable organization for the establishment of TIDF. And as I was mentioning, there were people from the governmental part, and there were people from like the cultural scene and artists and all that. So at that time, I think usually in Taiwanese society, there was also this mentality, if you want to start something really big, you really need or want to rely on governmental power in terms of funding and everything. So back then in 1998, the funding was 100% from the government, it was not the Ministry of Culture because that was a later organization, but it's similar to that, like cultural organizations back then. But then they didn't know or didn't realize how or what a festival would need in order to survive stably, and what does it mean to have stability in the organization and in the program. So in the first 4 years, it was actually held by the Film Archive, which is the precursor for TFAI, but it was not a fixed department or organization within the Archive Center. Back then, it was a task-based organization, so the festival team would come in and do the festival, and then they will leave. So they leave everything to the Film Archive, but nobody deals with this. And then in the next edition, maybe different people would come in to organize the festival. So that went on for 4 editions, which is 8 years. And then for some reason, which I didn't really know, the festival moved to the Taichung National Museum of Fine Arts, 国美馆, 国家美术馆. And it stayed there for 8 years, 4 editions, running in similar base. They were based there, but it's also on an edition base, like people would come in for this festival and do everything and then leave. And it was actually quite funny because the festival was held in Taichung for that 8 years, but the office was actually in Taipei. So they have this group of people working in Taipei, and then before the festival, they would move to Taichung and get everything ready. So it's a bit funny back then. And then I think it was in 2012 or 13, there was this discussion that this festival has to move to Taipei. For some reasons, I think from the Ministry of Culture, there was already Ministry of Culture back then. And then they decided to move the festival back to Taipei and come back to the Archive Center. And the Archive Center became Taiwan Film Institute and later on Taiwan Film and Audiovisual Institute. But at that time, in 2013, the festival became a department for this institute. And we have, year-round staff, for example, me and Wood and our program director and other people as well. It was a 4-person office back then. And we sort of built everything from not exactly zero, but there were a lot of things that we need to do. And then we recruit our team, like a long-term team, long-term staff members and short-term staff members, and then build everything from scratch. By everything, I didn't just mean the office itself, also the program structure. It was the program structure you see right now, like focus program, Taiwan program and all that, and the competition was all established at that time.
Talking about the program structure, maybe we can sort of have a look at the program this year. And well, I have participated in 4 TIDFs. They actually always differ a little bit. Sometimes sections are added, or they are maybe 2 sections are combined with each other, or maybe you can comment a bit on this year's edition. Well, was there a general idea?
Since we're biennial, so we actually have more time, as opposed to annual festivals, to think about what we want to do for our next edition. Usually we don't really set up a theme or a direction. We have many directions, many possibilities in the beginning to sort of explore. So we probably have A, B, C, D, E, 5 directions, and then we'll explore on that a little bit. But program structure itself is the same. Like we have 2 focus program, 2 Taiwanese program, and 3 competition and other stuff as well. So we explore on that, see what might fit into what might not, how can we change that direction, or how can we combine these 2 ideas into one, or maybe this idea has to be separated into 2. So that was maybe a half-year process for that. So we explore on the ideas, doing researches, watch a lot of films, and then eventually it boils down to all these little, slightly more solid ideas that fits into all the program structures. But then that's a very long process for me. And I always have this feeling that being a biennial puts us, as in the organizers, puts us in a different time zone as opposed to people who work for annual festivals. It's a very, very different mentality when you're programming for a biennial festival. Yeah.
Well, and I also get this sense on the competition side that because you're biennial, it has a wide window for when a documentary could have been completed such that it would apply to be included. And I know it's incredibly competitive.
It is very competitive. I think we have some more than 2,600 submissions for this edition. I mean, compared to sort of the A-grade documentary festivals, for example, the ITVA in Netherlands or other festival, it's a relatively smaller number, but for us it's a lot. One of the reasons is that we don't charge entry fee, so many people can apply. But I think that's also one of the reasons why we have more Asian submissions, because it doesn't take much for them to apply. So that gives us a wider window to see documentaries or to see Asian works.
Well, that's one of the strengths of the TIDF. Huh? That is, yeah.
But I think that
is, yeah, what is different from other festivals. And it's a festival in Asia, and it's a festival in the Chinese-speaking area of Asia. That's also reflected in programming. And it is a festival in Taiwan. So that is also reflected in the 2 program units that are showing Taiwanese documentaries.
But I think that also evolves through time, because by the beginning I mean 2013, when we first joined, the program structure or the program itself, we tried to focus of course on Asian films, but probably slightly a bit more on so-called Sinophone documentaries or Chinese-speaking documentaries. But then the Chinese-speaking documentaries filmmaking scene sort of changed in the past 10 years dramatically as well. And then we discovered more Asian films along the way. So that focus also shifted through time. So in the beginning, the competition actually comes in an order as international, Asian Vision, and then Taiwan. But I think it was 3 or 4 editions ago, we changed it to Asian Vision competition, and then international, and then Taiwanese. So we want to highlight Asian Vision as the key or the main competition that we have. Meaning that if you come to TIDF, you can see different Asian films than, let's say, if you go to Europe to see. They have very, very different lineup than we do.
What's amazing to me is at different places in the world, I've run into filmmakers who always say, oh, well, I'm applying for the next TIDF. And so,
yes, please do.
Exactly. Well, on that note, in case any of those filmmakers are listening, what are some recommendations you might give to someone who's thinking about submitting a film? Because obviously you want excellence, but maybe the idea of excellence is different depending on the documentary film festival. So what type of submissions do you think catch the eye of TIDF programmers?
We can probably go back to the title of the competition called Asian Vision. So there's a vision in there. I mean, vision is a wide word, but we were emphasizing on creative storytelling or different perspectives. I mean, stories are there, issues are there, but how you tell the story is what we value the most. I think that's the whole point. So because in documentary films, issues or questions or problems always comes in this kind of filmmaking. But how do you tell the story? Because at the end of the day, documentary is still cinema. So you have to think cinematically when you're making film. So that's something that we value the most when we're reviewing all the submissions.
I personally am more interested in the curated sections than in the competition sections, I have to admit. And this year there's I think a really exciting focus program. It's called Palestine, and it's Archiveless archive. And I understand that you were crucially involved in the programming of this program. Let us know a bit about it.
Where to start?
Maybe with the title.
It comes literally with the idea of Archiveless archive. I think, but I have to emphasize in the beginning that all of our program is a joint effort of the programming team. So it's not just me. So in the beginning, we were actually talking about like for Asian programs, because our focus programs are usually divided into Asian focus program and non-Asian focus program. So we were discussing like how or what we want to do with our Asian program this year. There were a lot of different inspirations coming from everywhere. Like I said, we have different ideas, sort of exploring. And then Wood, our program director, I think he was at one of the panel discussions at some festival. It was a panel discussion on the Palestinian film. And it was mentioning about, for example, we, TFAI, as an archive center, we are the National Archive Center for Audiovisual Heritage in Taiwan, for Taiwan. But then for Palestinians, they don't have that, because all these wars and disputing land and all these plunders of their archives. So the archives for Palestinian audiovisual heritage, actually, they were stolen, they were looted, or they were, displaced in many places already. So if a nation or if a people that doesn't have a centralized institute or organization to hold its memory, to hold its audiovisual heritage, how do you continue to tell your story? Because that's one of the things for film, one of the most important things for filmmakers to always go back to reference on. So we were sort of exploring that idea. We, as a archive center, how do we look at a people or a nation that doesn't have that? That's the start of this program. So we were exploring a lot of films. Of course, there was a huge volume that we can find, and there were also films that we can't find because they're literally everywhere, and you don't know who has it or how can you even just to look at it, to watch it. So it took us a long time, and we also have friends, Palestinian filmmakers, Palestinian programmers that help us to have access to those films. And then eventually, sometimes we were wondering if we should talk about the dispute, or we should talk about the war, or we should focus more on cinema itself. That was always a debate when we were trying to select the titles along the way. And eventually, I think we have to come back to what we are as a festival. We are sort of highlighting the artistic value of cinematic works. So that's what we want to focus on. And the second thing is we as an archive center, how do we see a nation that doesn't have an archive center? How do they continue their audiovisual creation and all that?
Well, and here I think it might be helpful to add some context for listeners, whether they're in Taiwan or outside of Taiwan, because actually I know a lot of people who've never been to the film archive here, who've never been to TFAI in Xinzhuang, and might not know what does it mean when we're even saying, oh, this archive, it's housed at an archive center, TIDF is housed or part of an archive institution. So it's a place where not only are there screening spaces, not only is there a library that has written texts that really document the history of cinema, not only in Taiwan, but around the world, but you also have workshops, you have lectures, you have retrospectives and programming where you're actively bringing a community in contact with audiovisual heritage. Now, a lot of the audiovisual heritage, especially in terms of film reels, is stored in another off-site repository, but it's still, a lot of these things are regularly brought out and brought to interact with people. And so I think that's another thing that I found really fascinating in seeing how you guys approached the Palestine program is there's also this very conscious awareness of the people.
I want to add one more thing, because I'm not sure who our listeners are, but an archive center, usually its mission, one of the most important mission for this kind of organization is to preserve audiovisual heritage. So we were always talking about preservation and repurpose or represent these audiovisual heritage. But for Palestinian people, these are audiovisual heritages has been constantly and deliberately erased, hidden, or changed. Mm-hmm. So on our perspective, we want to explore this situation and how in this situation they can go on, create audiovisual work and preserve their memories.
That's a really interesting perspective to also bring to the fore what Palestinians have faced in terms of not being able to preserve their own archive. I think what's interesting also is your program takes this issue back over 100 years. So I think that's also, there's a longer tale of history that I'm sure maybe people are not fully aware of. But then in dealing with these questions of other ways of dealing with archive, you also highlight people who are thinking very creatively. And so that's where you have people who are working not only with audiovisual texts or archival documents, but they're also thinking about the human body as a sort of embodied experience. So would you mind talking a little bit about some of the films in the Palestine program that specifically deal with dance and its relationship with the archive?
Mm-hmm. So usually when you work in an archive center, as I do, you think about archive as the medium that carries the image of everything, literally. But for Palestinian people, memory does not only exist in film stocks or video cassettes or in digital mediums. It is also their body. So when you are displaced in many corners in the world, how do you continue or carry on your own heritage, your culture, your language, your dance, your music? How do you carry that with you? It is only your body can be the medium to carry all this. Your body is the vessel for all that. So there are quite a few films in this year's program that deals with this idea by sort of learning or regaining the knowledge and the music or the movement of certain traditional dances or traditional movements that they use in various occasions, sort of to inscribe that in your body, sort of to to upload it to your body in a way, in a more fashion term, upload it to your body and store it in your body so that it doesn't, you don't lose it. So I think that's a very interesting idea in some of our films that we have this year. For example, Dancing Palestine, which is very obvious in the title. There are a few young Palestinian filmmakers. They're based in the UK, but they're away from their heritage for a very long time. Probably even the language itself, because if you know a bit Arabic, when you listen to what they say, you realize that the language is a bit broken already. But at the same time, they're trying very hard to regain that, the language and the dance movement itself, so that they can familiarize themselves with the traditions. And that includes also the music as well. They have to know where the music comes from and how do they make those moves and what meaning does those moves have. For example, there were people, when they were fighting against the intruders, they were throwing stones. So there were movements that they were throwing, or they were praying, or whatever. There are many, many different meanings as along the way that they were discovering all these movements.
I must say, for this section, it's really advisable to see more than one film to get
of course.
well, as a problem for all focus. No, but I think particularly for that section, because I saw a couple of the films that were dealing with images and with the loss of archives. I saw the one about the first national photographer, for example, and then the one that has this incredible footage about the British period, the British occupation. And well, then combined with this film, Dancing Palestine, that really gives you an idea what the loss of visual heritage means for Palestine.
And I think in this program we've been trying to do is not to show the audience old images. It's also about the way filmmakers use archival footages or archival images and how these images can be mobilized into a different narrative, a different rereadings of the archive through the narratives that they construct, and in order to reclaim the narratives of Palestinian people and their culture. So the aim is not to recover the lost history only, but to intervene in its telling and to shape a counter-archive that is sensory, that's also feminist and decolonial. Yeah.
That also is an interesting parallel. We brought up last week some of the documentaries on the war in Ukraine and how that's also something that people might have a very specific perception of because they've consumed a lot of news media. And I think that's a similar situation with Palestine, where people have perceived a lot of images and thus they might have drawn conclusions or think they understand something. But that's a news media aesthetic that's so different from what these documentarians are bringing to the table. And I find that to be really powerful. So I especially encourage people, if you are going to a festival and you say, I don't want to see things because I've already seen a lot about that place or that event or that piece of history, one of the things that I think TIDF is fantastic at is finding films that will help you reconceive or reapproach stuff that you think you're familiar with.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we've been, one of the most important ideas that we carry with us along the programming process is that we're not here to teach you about history, and we're not here to tell you what is right or wrong. We're thinking from a more cinematic point of view as to how these works can tell you a different aspect or different aspects of what you already know.
TIDF is also good with producing all kinds of materials accompanying the festival. And
you mean our goodies or
goodies as well, giveaways, souvenirs, but also brochures.
Do check our merch.
Yes, buy the merch this year. It's fantastic.
The
it's
merch
fantastic
is fantastic
every year, but get it this year.
But also there's a special booklet accompanying the Palestine program, and if you watch 2 films, you can get it for free. So, well, can I ask
I
you
have
for
to-
two for recommendations? If you watch for two films, which ones?
But I would also want to say something about that because we were just finishing the editing of that catalog, like a dedicated catalog for this program. Because the festival actually have very limited resources to bring filmmakers to Taiwan. But we already have 4 filmmakers coming. But there are more filmmakers who couldn't travel or who couldn't make it this time. So in that sense, we try to give our audience or our readers different ways in understanding these programs and understand or know more about the films and it's not really behind the scene, but how they make this film and what they were thinking when they were making these films. And it was really, really, really nice. We did 2 interviews online with 2 of the filmmakers. One of them actually will come to Taiwan. Okay, and there are other filmmakers we did interviews and they have their essays on their films, or they have interviews they've done with other people. But we think it's great, and it gives you more idea about their films, how they make their films. Yeah, so don't miss out that.
Okay, but still 2 recommendations. We always ask for recommendations, so you don't.
You can't leave if you don't give Stefanie 2 recommendations.
I have more than 2, as always. I'm very greedy on that. For people who don't really know much about Palestinian films or their audiovisual traditions or heritages, or what kind of danger this audiovisual heritage is facing, I would say they can start with Kings and Extras or R21. That's 2 films, but I'll see it as 1. It gives you an idea as to why their audiovisual heritage is missing, is looted, or where are their films, basically. Some were found, some were not. And that was my first film, including 2 films. The second one is actually a short program with 3 small titles: The Restored Pictures, The Silent Protest, 1929's Jerusalem, and Partition. So these 3 films deal with British ruling period. How do you call that?
British colonization or British occupation?
They didn't call it colonization, but I would think that it's the British era. Okay. The British era, despite I think it's very much colonization. And honestly, it is because of that period which led to all the history and evolving of this area that we know as it is now. But what I'm saying is, in these 3 films, they all deal with images that were made during that time. And like I was saying, they were in these films, it was not just recover of the lost history, but also in their filmmaking, there are a lot of details in their filmmaking, was trying to intervene with these images and have new rereadings of these images.
I remember specifically with Diana Allen's work, Partition, it's also getting into the issue of archive in a way that feels very salient sitting here in TFAI, where I think you guys have done such a great job at making things open access. Whereas one of the things that Diana Allen comes up against is videos that you would have to pay to use, and it's held within a British collection. And so it also gets into the ways in which contemporary archives can structure what we can see, what we can share, and the narratives that we can construct. And so I find that whole program, there's so much going on in those 3 films.
It's not just that film. I think it's in the whole documentary filmmaking scene, especially filmmakers who uses a lot of archival footages. There were other films in our program in the competition was also dealing with a similar problem, is that when you were trying to make films about your own story, you have to buy with a lot of money, buy your own images from your colonizer in order to tell your own story, and that's just absurd.
So actually, I have a question coming off of that, which is one of the big projects that TFAI accomplished in the past year was making a great number of newsreels from the martial law period open access for scholars, students, the general public. And I'm curious, are documentarians here in Taiwan starting to experiment and use that footage? Because I know people who study Taiwan documentary focus on the fact that during, especially the first part of martial law, there's very little focus on actual individual voices in Taiwanese documentary. And so it's very hard to find the personal and to find things beneath the politically acceptable narrative. But I'm curious if you're seeing people starting to work against the grain with this footage.
The whole open access project only started 2 years ago. Of course, before that, before it was made public, we had different projects inviting filmmakers to use these materials to make whatever they can, whatever they want with these materials. And I think the filmmakers in Taiwan have not used to the ideas that they can use it however and for whatever they like. So they're sort of still exploring on these ideas, but I think gradually it'll come. Yeah.
Well, and we'll include a link to that whole database in the show notes, because
that would be great. Yeah,
I highly encourage people to go look at it.
It's a very interesting project because there are a lot of things that, it was made during the martial law period, which I was not even born yet. But then to see those images, you can imagine where we come from and why we are what we are right now. I think there are a lot of things that you can think about.
Yeah, and also I think it's no small task for an archive to do this, because even
definitely not.
In places where you have tons of materials, some archives are incredibly restrictive in terms of what you can access. So I think TFAI is incredibly unique in this aspect in terms of how much effort people have put into making these things available, adding, having Chinese language transcripts. Like, you can't just, say, okay, we're going to open the floodgates here. Look at whatever
here you go, there
want.
It is. Go ahead. No, it's a lot of work. You have to go through cataloging and transcribe everything and all that. It's a huge effort. And honestly, I think there are already more than 5,000 films being released, but there's way more in our vault.
Something we might have to talk about in the future. Thank you so much. Do you have any last questions?
Thank you so much. No, I'm done.
Okay, cool.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And also, in case we weren't clear enough about it last time, we always put it in the show notes as well, but the dates for this year's festival are May 1st to May 10th. If you can, please join us. If you can.
You have to. Not if you can. You have to.
Oh, yeah. You have to join us. But there will also be plenty of other material that will be sort of available online in terms of covering and talking about the event. So there will be coverage. Please look out for that, both in terms of stuff that's going to be coming from TIDF itself, but also there's going to be a lot of interesting local press involved, and also film critics and commentators coming from overseas. So I think it'll be very exciting to see what are the takeaways that people have.
I think that's the whole point about being a festival. It's not just about showing films, it's also about meeting people. And the other thing is we always try to explore how reality or how nonfiction storytelling can be presented. So there is also other performances, lectures, and all that happening during the festival. So be sure to explore that too. We have lecture performance this year. Also, one of the program related to Palestinian program here.
And are there any meeting places in the evenings that are being? Because I know that's, like, for instance, Yamagata has their pickle factory where people go and congregate.
They don't have pickles anymore. They have a place to for gathering, but it's very nice. Yes, we do have that. It's called TIDF Offline. It's literally open to everyone. Anyone can come, literally. Like if you're an audience, if you're a filmmaker, if you're just someone to walk past by and find, oh, there's a lot of people. What are they doing? Come and join us. Yeah.
Well, we'll see you there then.
I will definitely go.
Finally, a practical tip: tickets sell quickly. Ticket sale starts on the 8th of April, right?
Yes.
So don't miss out.
Get your hands on that.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.